So today we'll be beginning my game by game prediction and roster discussion videos. So I'll be starting with the team that just won it all last year, Michigan, the Cheaters. So I'll be first going through the roster, and then I'll go through the schedule game by game and give you a predicted winner and loser for each game. First of all, if you're a Michigan fan that's thinking about telling me in the comments, Michigan didn't cheat, that you should think twice about that because they're on probation now for 3 years for cheating. And I don't think Michigan is getting anywhere near the national championship this year. You'll see that in a minute. But starting on the offensive side, so Michigan loses 10 out of 11 starters on offense, and I think they're really going to struggle on that side of the ball this year. Last year, they averaged over 32 points per game on offense, and this year I expect that to drop to around probably 24 points per game. And Michigan has always been a running team since I've watched football, and that's been a really long time. They've never had great quarterbacks, but uh, McCarthy, he's not a great quarterback to me at all. And I think that team that drafted him first round uh, made a big mistake, and I think he'll end up sitting on the bench and not be any good in the NFL. But he was the best quarterback that Michigan has had in my time of watching football. And right now, their quarterback situation looks bad. And if you're a Michigan fan that's wanting to tell me in the comments that uh, they've gotten a couple of Patrick Mahomes on your roster, that you should think twice about that too, because if you do that, once the season starts and Michigan is struggling to throw the football, I'll read your comments out loud on my channel. The expected starter now is Alex Orgy, who was a third string quarterback for them last year, has not thrown a pass in college, and he is a good runner. He was put in some to run last year. He ran 15 times for 86 yards last year, and he didn't look good at all at throwing the ball in the spring game, but he did look good running. Uh, so I think he won't be as good of a thrower as McCarthy uh, is. And at wide receiver, they look very weak there right now. Now, I'm not saying they couldn't have a receiver or two turn out to be good, but they haven't so far. So right now, that's a very questionable position. Now, you may be thinking Michigan never has good wide receivers, and usually that's been the case. But last year they actually did have two pretty good wide receivers that both got drafted that they're losing. Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson. Those weren't the kind of receivers like Marvin Harrison, where defensive coordinators are looking for a way to keep the ball away from them because there's no hope to cover them. But they were able to give Michigan at wide receiver what they hadn't had in a really long time. And they do have Colston Loveland coming back at tight end, the only returning starter on Michigan's offense, and he is good. He caught 45 passes for 649 yards and four touchdowns, averaging 14.4 yards per catch last year. I think he'll become one of the top tight ends in the country this year. But right now, Michigan's two best pass catchers are the tight end Loveland and running back Donovan Edwards. And now Loveland is good, but he's not like Brock Bowers is. So that is not a good sign for them that he's their best pass catcher. Uh, and so at running back, Blake Corum is a big loss. He was a really good running back for them. But Donovan Edwards will be taking over the starting job at running back, and he's really good. When he's playing his best, he's one of the best running backs in college football, and I think he will be one of college football's top running backs this season. I think he'll rush for well over 1,000 yards. And he also is a pretty good catcher. But I don't think they're going to be as good at running back without having Blake Corum there too, because other than Donovan Edwards, they are questionable at running back. So uh, they will have to keep him healthy, and he's not like uh, Derrick Henry, like where Alabama in 2015 just gave him the ball over and over and over again, uh, giving it to him so many plays in a row. Just running Donovan Edwards most of the time, I don't think is going to work for Michigan's offense that well. Uh, and then on the offensive line, the bad news is they lose all five starters, but the good news is the new head coach at Michigan, Sharon Moore, has been their offensive line coach these past 3 seasons when they've had these elite offensive lines. So I would expect them to still have a good offensive line. And they did add in a good offensive lineman from Northwestern, Josh Preby is his name. He has 29 college starts, and last season in 12 games, only gave up 4 sacks and 17 pressures. So that should help them out a little bit. Uh, and now on the defensive side, uh, their defense, I think, it will be similar to Georgia. Like in 2021, Georgia's defense was very similar to Michigan's in 2023. Uh, Teams could hardly move the ball on them. And then I think Michigan's defense now will be similar to how Georgia's has been since then. Like Georgia's defense is in 2022 and 2023, have they been good? Yes. Have they been great? Yes. But have they been as good as it was in 2021? No. So Michigan's defense, I still think, will be great, but not as great. Where last season they only allowed around 10 points per game on average. That'll probably move up to more like 14, I would think, this season. But their pass rush may still be the best in the country, and their defensive line, I think, could be just as strong as last year's. I think theirs and Ohio State's will be the top two defensive lines in college football this year. So they have five really good pass rushers uh, coming. Uh, Back. Four of them are players that were already on Michigan's roster, and one of them is a transfer. So on the defensive line, they do lose Chris Jenkins, who was a really good player for them, but they return Mason Graham, who is probably going to be a first round pick next season, and he'll be one of the best defensive linemen in the country. He had 23 total pressures last year and 3 sacks and a forced fumble and a fumble recovery and 35 tackles in 13 games last season. And then they've got Josiah Stewart, who had 38 tackles and 5.5 sacks and 27 total pressures last season. And they've got Kenneth Grant, who had 29 tackles and 3.5 sacks and 20 total pressures and an interception and 4 pass breakups last season. And then the other starter is expected to be on the defensive line, Rashawn Benny, who had 27 tackles and a sack and a forced fumble as a backup last year, and he was a four-star recruit. And at linebacker, I don't expect them to be as strong as they were last year. They are losing Michael Barrett and Junior Colson, who were two really good linebackers for them. But they still have a good group of linebackers. Ernest Husman was a backup last year and still had 46 tackles. And at Nebraska, the year before, as a freshman, he had 54 tackles. I expect him to have a really good season this year. And then they've also got Derek Moore, who was a backup last year and is a really good pass rusher who had 24 total pressures and 5 sacks last season. And he also had 34 tackles and a forced fumble and fumble recovery. And then they bring in from Maryland Jay Sean Barham, who in 2022 in 12 games had 59 tackles and uh, 19 total pressures, 4 sacks, and a fumble recovery and a forced fumble. And then in 2023, he had in 10 games 37 tackles and 21 total pressures and 3 sacks and an interception. And then in the secondary, they have two really good defensive backs coming back. Will Johnson will be one of the best cornerbacks in the country this year. He has in 26 total games in college 54 tackles and 7 pass breakups and 7 interceptions, and he had a pick six last season. And they have McCary Page, who is a really good safety, uh, and he has in 26 games in college 82 tackles and 4 pass breakups and a fumble recovery and an interception. And then the other starting corner is expected to be Jerry Hill, who was a red. It will be a red shirt freshman this year. He didn't play much last year, only having 8 tackles, but he is a four-star recruit. Um, and the other starting safety is expected to be Quentin Johnson, who was a backup last year, but still had 22 tackles and 4 pass breakups and an interception and a forced fumble. So their secondary probably won't be quite as good as last year, but it's still going to be really good, I think. And on special teams, they do lose their starting kicker from last year. They bring in a transfer kicker from Arkansas State who uh, made 17 of 22 field goals with a long of 53. And they do return their punter from last season. So now moving on to the predictions. So they start the season against Fresno State, and this is a nice start for Michigan because it's a game that they're in no danger of losing, but Fresno State should be good enough to give them a test. And it's a game where I expect Sharon Moore to play different quarterbacks and to try to figure out the right quarterback for them before the game next week after that against Texas. And I expect, though, Michigan to win this one by a blowout. Uh, so now the Texas game, I think Texas has a much better offense than Michigan does everywhere. They have a much more experienced offensive line. They may not have a running back as good as Donovan Edwards, but they have more depth at running back than Michigan does. And they have a much better quarterback with Quinn Ewers than Michigan does, and their receivers are much better. Now, defensively, Michigan could be a little bit better than Texas. Texas does lose two really good defensive linemen from last year, so Donovan Edwards, I would expect to probably be able to run some on Texas. But I just don't think Michigan is enough better on defense than Texas to make up for how much better Texas is going to be than Michigan on offense. So I think this will be similar to when Texas played Alabama in week 2 of last season. I think Texas will beat them by around 10 points, and I think that the final score will probably be similar to what it was in that game. That score was 34 to 24. I expect this to be around a 30 to 20 type of game. So now, after that, they play Arkansas State, which will be a very easy win. Uh, so the quarterback situation I don't expect to be figured out until at least the Texas game. Maybe it even goes into this game against Arkansas State. Like if the starting quarterback for Texas game has a lot of trouble, the new head coach Moore might want to try someone else for this game against Arkansas State. And now they start their conference schedule against USC. So USC will have a much better quarterback than Michigan. They'll have better wide receivers, probably by a lot. Uh, but defensively, USC I don't think is going to be better enough to be able to beat Michigan. Mm, uh, and Michigan's offense isn't the type this year that's going to be able to go out there and score 50 points, even if USC's defense isn't any better. But Michigan's defense, I think, will slow down USC's offense and get them the win in a close one, probably a one-score game. So now, moving on to Minnesota. Michigan is still much better than Minnesota. Minnesota may not be terrible, but I expect Michigan to beat them by a couple of touchdowns. Mm, so now they will be playing uh, Washington on the road. So since Michigan's blowout win over Washington in the national championship, both teams have obviously changed a lot, but Michigan hasn't gotten as much worse, I don't think, as Washington has. Washington, I think, will have a better quarterback than Michigan, but wide receiver, Washington is, I think, just as questionable as Michigan is, and they don't even have a tight end like Loveland to help them out. Uh, and their offensive line at Washington, I think, is even more questionable than Michigan's. And I don't think Washington has a running back as good as Donovan Edwards. And then Michigan's defense is better by a lot than Washington, I think, at every position except for linebacker. So I think Michigan beats Washington. Uh, and now they will be playing Illinois next. So Illinois, I think, is going to be awful. I think Michigan ends up beating them by probably like 17 points. Probably a lower scoring game, but Michigan's defense will just be too much because Illinois' offense, I think, is going to struggle too. Uh, so then uh, next they will be playing Michigan State uh, in the rivalry game. So I don't expect this to be near as bad as it was last year when Michigan beat them 49 to nothing. I don't think Michigan State will get shut out and Michigan won't score. I don't think anywhere near 49 points, but I still expect Michigan to win this game by probably close to 20 points, like 17 or 18 points, because they're still way ahead of Michigan State, in my opinion. Uh, so then now Michigan at this point would be 7-1 and undefeated in the conference. So they will still have a good chance to make the college football playoff and the conference championship. And then it will be time for their next big game against Oregon. And Oregon's defense is probably pretty similar to Michigan's. Mm, uh, their defensive line is going to be really good too. They're going to be really good at linebacker and in the secondary. Uh, and Oregon's offense though is so much better than Michigan's. They may have the best quarterback in the country, and Michigan probably has a below average quarterback. Oregon has a better offensive line that's more experienced than Michigan's, and they've got more depth at running back, even though they may not have a Donovan Edwards. And then their wide receivers at Oregon are so much better than Michigan. So I can't pick Michigan in this game. I think Oregon wins by probably about 10 points. And then next they play Indiana on the road. That one could be a challenge at least for a little while. Indiana has added in a lot of transfers that are pretty good. I expect them to be quite a bit improved this year, but they're still a long ways from Michigan. So I expect Michigan to still beat them by probably around 2 touchdowns. And then next, Northwestern. Northwestern's offense and Michigan's offense, I think, will both probably struggle, but Michigan's got a big advantage, I think, on defense over Northwestern. And I think Michigan wins the low scoring game by probably around 2 touchdowns. Mm, mm, and then now it's time for the rivalry game against Ohio State. So I think Ohio State has the advantage over Michigan everywhere on their team this year, except probably linebacker. Ohio State has probably the best defensive line and secondary in the country. They've got two really good running backs. They've got a good quarterback coming in, and they've got a much better group of wide receivers than Michigan, and their offensive line is, I think, going to be better this year than Michigan's. It's a whole lot more experienced. I think that Michigan's defense will keep Ohio State's offense under 30 in this game, but Michigan's offense, I don't think, will be able to do hardly anything in this game. I think Ohio State wins this one by like 24 to 10 or 27 to 13. Uh, mm, so that will put Michigan at 9-3 and 7-2 in the conference this season, and that will put them out of the conference championship and most likely the college football playoff. And I do think though that this will be an okay season for Michigan because of all the changes, and I really do think that this new head coach that they brought in will end up working out for them. Uh, just this season, there's too many questionable things on offense for me to think that they're going to have an elite team again. But that will be it with this video. And please subscribe and thanks for watching. And I'll be back very soon.